the laws are new laws. There's no getting around that. But the laws are created and they were based on a system that existed. And the system that existed was the existing relationship between the United States and with Puerto Rico, a relationship that has existed for over 100 years and that has taken on its own distinct personality for the last 60 or so years, and that has provided Puerto Rico with the ability to already incentivize particular areas such as it has done with manufacturing and with the tourism sector and with other sectors. What we did that was novel is that we basically took that relationship and we worked laws that at the end of the day would provide an incentive for individuals to move down, to take advantage of unique benefits that they would only obtain here in Puerto Rico, and on the service exportation side, to put them in a position to be able to continue doing exactly what they are doing in any other part of the world, but do it from Puerto Rico. The beauty of exportation of services, especially in this day and age, is that we have the internet, we have cell phones, we have video conferences. Those things that used to limit Puerto Rico in that regard by virtue of being an island in the Caribbean no longer limit us. We are now completely integrated and connected to the rest of the world at light speed. So in that sense, there's no disadvantage for the service providers that are in Puerto Rico to be able to provide services that they may have been provided from New York perhaps some years ago from the island. And in that sense, I think more people as we go forward are going to see these benefits, and we're going to really create an ecosystem that provides for a social and professional infrastructure that will be able to coalesce into something that's going to be much greater than the sum of the parts. And that's what you find in the great service cities of the world. When you go to New York and you go to London, you go to Paris and Los Angeles and others, they all kind of specialize on their own thing. But what you can have certainty of is that whatever that thing may be, they're going to provide all the services that you need to be able to do it. If you go to New York, you're going to have a focus probably in the financial sector, and you're going to have all the bankers, all the lawyers, and all the accountants that you need. If you're going to go to London, you might specialize in the area of insurance. You're going to have, again, all the service providers necessary to make that happen, and the same in LA as far as the movie and creative services go. What we need to do here in Puerto Rico is be able to create that entirety of services necessary to provide folks that may have an interest of using Puerto Rico as a platform to be able to do anything and everything that they need to be successful. And we can do that. We have the services here already. It's just a matter of focusing them on the right things, and that's what I think these laws do.
To show potential investors that this is not something that was just cooked up yesterday, one has to understand that this is a policy that was started 114 years ago with the 4-Acre Act in 1900, which was the first organizing act to organize the municipal government of Puerto Rico. And there have been evolutions of this concept of using these tax benefits as a way to grow an economy. In the 1950s, there was something called Operation Bootstrap, and it was all about these poor Puerto Rican people who didn't have jobs, and it was a way to attract business from the United States through manufacturing to create manufacturing jobs. There have been agricultural programs before that, then there was the manufacturing, and then as we morph as a society and as our economy has changed, so we've moved more to a technology age, we've moved more to an age where we actively market and develop financial services. And so that's one of the things that Puerto Rico has morphed with. And they've said, okay, so now our economy is not agrarian anymore, and it's not just entirely manufacturing. So what is it? Well, you know, it's morphed to tourism. So we have tax incentivized programs to get a tourism investment in. And we've morphed to becoming a bit of a financial center, right? And a center in the Caribbean, which, by the way, provides huge upside to the U.S. government if it opens its eyes and recognizes that, because we're in a region here where there's a lot of things going on. You know, there's a lot of capital flight that leaves the United States, and I've testified before Congress and said, listen, you can stop this money from flying out to the Caribbean. 23% of the capital flight at one time was coming through the Caribbean. And we're not talking about the U.S. territories now. We're talking about the other ones. You know, so I said, Congress, you know, you need to work a little harder on these policies in developing this, because with these incentivized programs, you can take that money that wants to leave the United States and you can stop it right inside the border of the United States in Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. And in those places, you'll get a real benefit because you'll have functioning economies, and we become an attractor as a center for life in the Caribbean, and we're a hub between South America, North America, and Europe. And a lot of great tactical and strategic things can be done for the United States through the recognition of this. So these are not fly-by-night things. It is part of a steady development of law and economy. And as economies change, these tax incentives, which all have the same principle underlaying them, morph to accommodate them. So the statute, the federal statute that authorizes Puerto Rico to do this is in Title 26 U.S.C. 933 of the tax code. And that statute hasn't changed much as the economy has changed. And what has changed is that the Puerto Rican legislature, as it looks at new opportunities for the economy, they have created new programs that have as their statutory base the federal law, Section 933. So that hasn't changed much. So this is a pretty stable concept.
What makes these laws work and attractive is that Puerto Rico has had a very long-standing relationship with the United States. We've been partners with the U.S. for a very long time. We're U.S. citizens. There's no passport that's required to travel to and from, and we're as American as anybody born in New York. That being said, we're not a state, and the relationship that Puerto Rico and the United States currently have is a relationship where Puerto Rico as a Commonwealth is going to be in a position to be able to, whoever comes from the U.S. as American citizens and moves to Puerto Rico, not have the worldwide income that would be applicable anywhere else in the world, applicable while you're here in Puerto Rico. So that obviously puts us in a position to be able to reap the benefits of the relationship in such a way that you're going to be able to very uniquely provide benefits to American citizens that they may not be able to get anywhere else. If you take the example of Eduardo Zavarin, who moved to Singapore, well, if he had moved to Puerto Rico rather than to Singapore, he wouldn't have had to basically renounce his American citizenship. He would have been able to remain as an American citizen, come here to Puerto Rico, and be able to have the same types of benefits as he does now in Singapore. Those are the types of things that we need to promote in order to bring those individuals to the island.
At the end of the Spanish-American War, the United States for the first time was a world power of sorts, where we owned things that were outside the contiguous limits of the United States. So this was beyond the manifest destiny territories and states. And so, but it was a completely different life. I mean, people didn't speak English in Puerto Rico. And so the courts and the executive branch are wrestling with, well, what are we going to do, and how are we going to establish, what was deemed in some of the case law as Anglo-American traditions and court systems and things like that. And when the Congress looked at this and they thought that the cost of this would be staggering, they thought, okay, we're going to have to give these places a way to raise their own money. And the territories were never viewed as a revenue raiser for the United States. And the case law is pretty clear on that, So that in some of the early territorial law, like in the Naval Appropriation Act of 1922, which was what funded the Virgin Islands as an example, that's when the tax code was made applicable to the territory, because it was a way for the territory to gain revenue, and there was never any intention that this money would be going to the United States. And it's much the same in Puerto Rico. And that started with the Four-Acre Act in 1900, where Congress said, we got to find a way so that the municipal government of Puerto Rico can survive and grow and flourish. So all of these tax programs are based on U.S. developmental policy towards its territories. And it's really important to understand that, because then all of this makes a lot more sense. Okay, so for example, if you look at the fact that we are in a hurricane zone, if you look at the fact that it's very expensive to bring goods to the Caribbean, that the infrastructure in these territories needs a lot of help, okay? Where is that money coming from? And so what Congress decided is we're going to create tax benefits, and we are going to encourage wealthy people in the United States to move to these territories to start industry. And in the Jobs Act, which occurred in October of 2004, this was a big blow to the territories because there was a person who I will call a rogue Treasury agent who went to Congress and started saying all these terrible things about the programs down here. And there weren't any hearings. It was just, you know, okay, in the middle of the night, everybody knew the Jobs Act was going to pass. It was a big pork barrel thing that created a lot of revenue in all of the jurisdictions of the states, and they did this on the back of the territories, and they started, that's when they came up with these pretty tough residency rules, you know. And so the next year, the IRS started putting the rules out on residency. So I went to the Department of Interior, and which has jurisdiction over a lot of the territories, and I said, look, you know, you've got to stand up and you've got to tell the IRS that this is a part of U.S. development policy. And I pretty much wrote it out for them, and they did make that presentation to Treasury in 2005. So we have that document in which the executive branch of government, the Department of the Interior, is explaining to the IRS that these tax laws have all been supported by successive administrations from both parties. And they're supported because you have to understand how life is in the territories. And they even went into the hurricanes and some of the other things. And they said, this is the only way. Okay, this is an important U.S. objective. So they're great tax benefits. What I would say to people who are thinking about coming down here is recognize your responsibility. If you come down here to take advantage of these tax benefits, that's great. They're real. Okay. But what we want you to do is to help develop the economies of these territories, you know. So make investments in Puerto Rico, make investments, create jobs. That's what these laws are designed to do. And if you do that, you present a different picture at the moment that the IRS decides to audit you, because we can show the IRS, here are the congressional objectives for the laws, and here's how my client has fulfilled those objectives, you know. So this is important stuff, and it's great, and it's great for the people of Puerto Rico and for the people of the Virgin Islands and for the people of the Mariana Islands and Guam, because this is their lifeline, you know. One of the ways from an economic standpoint, if you think about this, about how the United States is organized, it's like money in, money out. So the states send money to the central government, right? And what does the central government do with it? It spends a lot of that money back in those very same states. You know, not on a dollar for dollar cost basis, but you know, if you're living in you know, Seattle, Washington, you know that there's a lot of defense spending that happens there. Okay, so tell me what federal spending you see as you walk around the islands of Puerto Rico and Virgin Islands. It's almost nothing, okay? In fact, there were some military installations here, and the U.S. government shut them all down. And so how do these territories who are way off the beaten path fund themselves? You know, they are limited by the you know, United States laws. I mean, they're part of the United States, but they don't have all the same rights that people in the United States have. And here is the trade-off. Okay, we'll give you these tax benefits. So the tax benefits are designed to stimulate the economies here, and when investors come down here, entrepreneurs come down here, they should keep that in mind. One of the wonderful things I like about entrepreneurs is they're always thinking, right? They're always seeing how to create a better mousetrap, and they'll have that opportunity in Puerto Rico.
The acts work in conjunction. They're basically a yin to a yang, if you will. You know, the first of the two that I'll describe is Act 22. It's basically an act that provides passive income benefits to individuals that move to Puerto Rico. Now, these have to be individuals that had not been residents of Puerto Rico for the 15-year window prior to the approval of the law. And that was done in order to keep these incentives as smart incentives, if you will. Basically, people that already had the potential of moving back to Puerto Rico, such as folks that perhaps move outside of Puerto Rico to go study and come back, are individuals that at the end of the day would come back and that should contribute to the Treasury, because they would be, you would over-incentivize them if you gave them any benefits, because chances are they were going to come back to Puerto Rico. Individuals, perhaps like yourself, that never would have imagined anything about Puerto Rico and never would have explored the possibility of moving down are the types of individuals that you would want to bring down, because it's really individuals that will always add to the bottom line, because any dollar of revenue that we get from you, whether it's via income tax or whether it's by virtue of you going to a restaurant or renting a car or using a taxi or whatever the case may be, is money that's going to be good for the economy and well spent at a time when we really do need that cash flow. So that ultimately worked in order to bring individuals down, to bring liquidity, to bring capital. But then the other side of the equation is what we sought to achieve with Act 20 of 2012. Act 20 is an export services bill. What it does is it incentivizes the service providers that we have in Puerto Rico so that they will look for opportunities to provide their services outside of the island. Basically, you have world-class lawyers, architects, engineers, economists, consultants. They're here, and they have been for a long, long time. They've acquired really what's a world-class level of expertise in their particular fields, but they haven't deployed. They haven't really sought to provide services outside of the island, and that's been a missed opportunity, I think, for Puerto Rico for a very long time. And what we did is provide an incentive where these individuals, if they provide a service from Puerto Rico to individuals or companies outside of Puerto Rico, and the service that they're providing does not have a nexus to Puerto Rico, these individuals will be rewarded with a corporate 4% tax rate as far as the company goes, and a 0% rate on the dividends. The idea was for these world-class service providers to see the benefits of engaging in exportation of services, to get on a plane, to make the calls to their contacts outside of Puerto Rico, and ultimately be able to provide services from the island that without the incentives they wouldn't provide. That would give them a revenue stream that would come to the island that otherwise wouldn't be here. It would also free up for other service providers to take over the work that the service providers that are now exporting their services are providing to the folks here in Puerto Rico. So I think it's a good way to basically integrate Puerto Rico to the rest of the United States economy as well as the Latin American economies, and provide it with the possibility of becoming a bridge between the Americas, if you will, and do it in such a way where people will come to Puerto Rico and populate and act as natural promoters for the island outside of Puerto Rico. That's another provision that was implemented in order to make sure that these incentives worked as smart incentives. Basically, let's take the lawyer example. It's an easy one to understand. If you're a lawyer and you're consulted by somebody in New York, let's say, because they want to have you figure out how the laws of Puerto Rico would work for them if they want to invest in Puerto Rico, well, that's really work that normally would come to a Puerto Rican lawyer, or at least somebody that has knowledge about the Puerto Rican laws, because the subject matter of the service that's being provided pertains to Puerto Rico. So in that sense, that's a captive audience. That's a market that's really not going to be seeking New York-based lawyers or lawyers based in Dallas or in any other jurisdiction. So it really doesn't make any sense for the Treasury to leave money on the table as far as the tax dollars that would go to the Treasury on the benefits or profits of that type of service that's provided. Now, if on the converse side, if you have a client in New York that wants to open up a manufacturing plant, but they want to open it up in Dallas, and they ask a Puerto Rican attorney that has experience in opening up manufacturing plants to help them with that process, now that's an exportation of services, because that's the kind of service that normally wouldn't be provided to a service provider from Puerto Rico. We've now done it so that the service providers that have that expertise will get on a plane and will make their case as to why they should do that work. They also have, because of the lower tax rate, the flexibility to be able to adjust their rates to compete favorably. So it really puts us on a position to be able to be as aggressive as any particular service provider wants to be able to get a revenue stream that normally wouldn't be coming to Puerto Rico. One of the things that's unique about Act 20, as opposed to different efforts that may have taken place in the past, is that it doesn't limit the benefits to any particular type of service. It really opens the gamut of any and every type of service that one can think of under the moon. I mean, it gives you a very long list of the types of services that it applies to, and then it has a clause that I specifically put there because I wanted to make sure that that list wasn't looked as something that was exclusive. It should be inclusive, and that clause basically says that if there's a service that doesn't fall within the 20 or so categories that we specifically put into the law, the Secretary of Economic Development can insert that by way of regulation in order to include that into further activities. But the idea was, and the law permeates throughout, the idea was that this be something that applied to any service. What makes that something that works from a legislative perspective is that we put the rules in place. So once you put the rules in place, which again are that you provide a service from Puerto Rico, you provide that service to an entity or an individual outside of Puerto Rico, and that the service not have a nexus to Puerto Rico. So long as you meet that, by definition, basically, any service that you provide is always going to be a good thing for Puerto Rico because it will always bring new activity to Puerto Rico. It won't be something that will cannibalize any existing revenue for the Treasury Department. So in that sense, it shouldn't be something that would be excluded. And the law specifically allows for that not to happen. Making a life decision where you're moving down to Puerto Rico, wherever you may live, or if you're going to basically move your company down or establish a new one, is a major life decision. You have to be comfortable with everything about it. Certainly you have to be comfortable with the ability to live in Puerto Rico, with the ability to do the services that you were previously doing from the island. But I think it's, you've hit on the head. One of the most important things is probably that you want to make sure that these benefits that you're making all of these sacrifices and changes for aren't taken away. And what we did in order to ensure that is that we took what was a concept created for the manufacturing sector, which is the tax decree concept, which is basically a contract between the government of Puerto Rico and with whoever receives the decree, and we applied it to both Law 20 and to individuals through Law 22. That's something that had never been done before. And what it does is it provides you with a contract, and the beauty of a contract is that now you're protected under the Contracts Clause of the Constitution of Puerto Rico and the United States. So that basically, if the law were at some point repealed, which I don't envision given the great success that these laws have had, you're still going to be protected so long as you had your contract in place, because what gives you the rights to the benefits isn't the law, it's the contract. The only thing that the law does is that it empowers the Secretary of Economic Development and Commerce with the power to give the decree. But the decree is what really establishes those benefits. Once you have your decree, you're good for the term of the decree, which in the case of Law 22 is a benefit that you get up until 2036. And in the case of Law 20, it's a 20-year decree with the possibility of a 10-year extension. So these benefits are going to be in place for whoever gets their decrees for a very long time, which allows for it to reap benefits for you at a corporate or personal level that makes the trip to Puerto Rico and the move worthwhile.
Even if Congress were to take these away, okay, I believe that taxpayers that have a decree, okay, in other words, they have a contract from the Puerto Rican government, that those contract rights must be respected by the United States government, because after all, Puerto Rico is an instrumentality, is a federal instrumentality of the federal government. So in one sense, the federal government, Puerto Rico is the federal government. It's just an agency of the federal government. And that's how we differ from a state.